The early morning sun had barely crept over the Los Angeles skyline, casting a golden hue across the tarmac at LAX. The day had just begun, but for Captain Marcus Hill, it was already familiar territory. He strode confidently across the polished marble of Terminal B, the rolling click of his carry-on luggage trailing behind him in rhythm with his polished black boots. Marcus had been flying for over 25 years. A former Air Force pilot turned commercial airline captain, he had earned his wings the hard way, through sweat, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. At 49 years old, he wore his age well, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, with a smooth voice and steady gaze that made even the most nervous passengers feel safe at 35,000 feet. His crisp navy blue uniform was immaculately pressed, gold bars gleaming from his epaulettes, and his ID badge hung clearly visible from a lanyard across his chest. Today he was assigned as captain on Flight 706, a high-profile international route from Los Angeles to London. It was a flight he had flown dozens of times but never took for granted. As always, he arrived at the airport 2 hours early. Preparation wasn't just part of the job, it was part of who he was. The airline's private crew terminal was quiet that morning. He greeted the security guard with a warm smile and a "Good morning," before making his way toward the cockpit lounge, a reserved space for pilots, co-pilots, and flight leads to relax, sip some coffee, and review flight plans before takeoff. Located just past the staff screening area, the cockpit lounge was a place that rarely saw drama. After all, the people who entered were seasoned professionals. Marcus reached the glass doors of the lounge and scanned his badge against the reader. It gave its usual cheerful beep, and the magnetic lock clicked. He grasped the handle and opened the door. "Excuse me, sir," a sharp voice called out from behind. Marcus turned, puzzled. A white woman in her mid-30s with a tight bun and a clipboard approached briskly. Her name tag read Claire Sutton, Operations Supervisor. She was dressed in the standard ground crew blazer, radiating the kind of authority that didn't come from years of leadership, but rather from the clipboard and earpiece she carried like badges of power. "You can't go in there," she said firmly, positioning herself between Marcus and the lounge entrance. He blinked. "Pardon?" "This area is restricted to authorized airline personnel," she said, gesturing to a sign next to the door that Marcus had passed through at least 100 times before. "If you're a guest or a passenger, you'll need to return to the public terminal." There was no aggression in her voice, just a cold, clinical certainty that what she saw in front of her didn't match what she believed belonged there. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He'd dealt with worse in life, and certainly in this industry. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Marcus Hill. I'm flying the 706 to Heathrow this morning. I'm here early to review my flight brief and meet with my crew." Claire stared at him for a beat too long. Her lips tightened. She glanced at the badge on his lanyard, but didn't lean in to read it. "I haven't seen you around here before, and just because you say you're a pilot doesn't mean I can let you in without verifying." A few feet away, a young male pilot, white, clean-cut, no more than 26, walked past and waved at Claire. "Morning, Claire," he said, flashing his badge and pushing through the doors without interruption. Claire smiled at him and nodded, then turned back to Marcus. "I'm going to need to make a call to confirm. In the meantime, I'll have to ask you to wait outside." Marcus's jaw tensed. "You're delaying a senior captain, one assigned to a transatlantic flight, in the cockpit lounge meant for senior crew. Based solely on what exactly?" Claire's tone didn't change. "Sir, I'm following procedure." "No," Marcus said, his voice calm but edged. "You're following assumption." For a long second, they locked eyes. Around them, the few staff members walking by slowed their pace, sensing the tension. A couple of flight attendants passing through paused briefly, glancing between Marcus and Claire. "I suggest you make your call," Marcus said quietly. Without a word, Claire stepped aside and reached for her radio. Marcus didn't wait. He pulled out his phone, tapped a contact labeled Ops Director, Urgent, and raised it to his ear. "Hey, it's Hill," he said simply. "We have a situation. Can you meet me at the crew lounge? Now." He ended the call and returned the phone to his pocket. Claire smirked slightly as if she still held the upper hand. "They'll tell me if you're cleared. Until then..." She didn't get to finish her sentence. From down the hall, 3 senior personnel in suits were approaching quickly, one of them motioning toward Marcus. The lead figure, a stocky white man in his 50s with silver-rimmed glasses, walked with purposeful urgency. "Captain Hill," he called out, his voice echoing slightly. "I came as soon as I got your call." Claire's face drained of color. Claire Sutton stood frozen, the clipboard in her hands trembling slightly as she watched the trio approach. The man leading them was John Michaels, Director of Operations for the entire West Coast division of the airline. His face was tight, eyes narrowed with purpose as he came to a halt in front of Marcus. "Captain Hill," John said with a firm handshake, his voice a blend of respect and concern. "I apologize for the delay. I came as soon as I got your call." "No worries," Marcus replied calmly, his tone smooth but clearly firm. "We have a small situation with access control. I was denied entry to the cockpit lounge." John turned to Claire, who now looked visibly pale, her posture stiff. "Is that true?" John asked her directly. Claire nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I wasn't aware he was who he is. He didn't identify himself properly." John's brow furrowed. "His uniform, his badge, and the fact that he's scheduled as the captain for Flight 706 aren't proper identification?" Claire opened her mouth but said nothing. "Did you verify his ID?" I didn't get that far. I was following policy." John exhaled hard through his nose and rubbed his temple. "Claire, I've warned all ground supervisors about this. We've had training on implicit bias and procedural discretion. Captain Hill has flown more long-haul international routes for this airline than any other pilot in the last 5 years. He's on the Safety and Operations Advisory Board. He's not just one of our most senior captains. He helped write the emergency playbook you reference in your training manual." Claire's face was now the color of old paper. "I thought," she stammered. "I just assumed." John's voice turned colder. "Exactly. You assumed. And that assumption led you to humiliate one of the most respected men in this organization. You embarrassed this airline in front of crew and staff." Around them, the lounge was now unusually quiet. Employees who had been walking past were now still, most pretending to check their phones or review schedules, but clearly eavesdropping. One younger flight attendant whispered something to her colleague and glanced apologetically toward Marcus. Marcus didn't say much. He simply stood there, shoulders back, gaze level, not gloating, but also not softening. His expression said everything. "I've been here before, and I'm tired of being here again," Claire finally said almost in a whisper. "I didn't mean anything by it. I was just trying to do my job." "No," Marcus responded, breaking his silence. His voice was low, steady. "You were trying to enforce authority that you thought you had over someone you assumed didn't belong." Claire swallowed hard, her eyes beginning to glisten. "Let's not turn this into a personal attack," she muttered weakly. "No one's attacking you," Marcus replied. "But let's be very clear. You were ready to call airport security on a uniformed captain with proper credentials, because I didn't look like who you thought should be flying the plane." A few crew members nearby nodded silently. John stepped back into the conversation. "Captain Hill, I want to extend a formal apology on behalf of the airline. We'll be documenting this incident thoroughly. Claire, effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties. Please return your radio and ID badge to HR by end of day." Claire blinked. "Wait, what? You're firing me? Over one mistake?" "It's not one mistake," John said sharply. "It's the latest in a pattern of behavior. There have been other complaints, and this is the final one I'll tolerate." "I didn't mean—" "But you did it," John cut in. There was silence again. Claire slowly unclipped her radio and badge, handing them over without another word. She turned, walked away stiffly, and disappeared down the hallway. No one clapped, but the air in the lounge shifted noticeably. John turned back to Marcus. "We're pushing back your flight by 45 minutes. We'll have a replacement supervisor assigned immediately. You'll have full clearance and access as always." Marcus gave a single nod. "Appreciated." John hesitated. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I know it's not the first time, but I wish it would be the last." Marcus looked him in the eyes. "So do I." He turned and entered the cockpit lounge, the familiar hiss of espresso machines, the soft buzz of voices, the scent of fresh coffee. These were part of his routine, but today they felt muted, tainted. A young co-pilot stood up awkwardly and offered a handshake. "Captain Hill," he said quietly, "I saw what happened out there. I'm sorry, for what it's worth." Marcus looked at him and smiled gently. "Then make sure you're not the kind of officer who ever makes someone else feel like they don't belong." The co-pilot nodded. As Marcus sat down at the table to begin reviewing his flight plan, he allowed himself a long, quiet breath. It wasn't over. Not yet. But the message had been delivered. The lounge remained respectfully quiet as Captain Marcus Hill sat with his tablet open, reviewing the flight details for 706 to Heathrow. His fingers swiped through weather data, fuel estimates, and routing reports, but his mind was only half present. Though he was calm on the outside, the encounter with Claire lingered in the back of his thoughts like an echo in an empty hangar. He had been here before, far too many times, denied entry, asked to show extra ID, assumed to be baggage crew, valet, or ground support, simply because of his skin. At this point in his career, it didn't sting like it once had. It just exhausted him. He tapped a final note into the tablet and exhaled, rising to his feet. It was time to meet the crew at the gate. Gate B47 was already bustling with passengers and staff. The boarding monitors displayed Flight 706, LAX to LHRONTIME in clean block letters. Marcus walked toward the gate, nodding to the agent scanning boarding passes. "Captain Hill reporting," he said. "We're about 35 minutes behind schedule." "Yes, sir," the gate agent replied. "Crew is almost assembled. The replacement supervisor has just arrived to sign off on catering and security protocols." "Good," Marcus said. "Let's make sure we brief the team promptly." As he stepped toward the aircraft, another member of the flight crew joined him. First Officer Brian Carter, a tall, sandy-haired man in his early 40s, with a southern accent and a steady demeanor. Brian had flown with Marcus before. He knew the man's professionalism, but also respected the quiet fire that burned behind his calm eyes. "You good, Cap?" Brian asked as they walked down the jet bridge. Marcus nodded. "Always." "You want a brief on the deck?" "In a minute. I want to check something first." They entered the cockpit, and Marcus slipped into the left seat. The controls gleamed under the gentle overhead lights. He adjusted the yoke slightly, as he always did, as if feeling the soul of the machine. After a few minutes of pre-checks, he turned to Brian. "Run the checklist. I'll be back." Brian gave a curious look but said nothing. He trusted Marcus. Marcus stepped out of the cockpit and returned to the terminal entrance, where the new ground supervisor, a man named Raul Moreno, was signing a checklist clipboard with the catering lead. "Supervisor Moreno?" Marcus said. Raul looked up, surprised. "Captain Hill, yes, sir. I need a quick word before we board." "Of course." They stepped aside to a quiet corner near the gate. Marcus lowered his voice. "There was an incident earlier today. A member of your team, Claire Sutton, denied me access to the crew lounge based solely on visual assumption. She didn't even read my badge." Raul's expression darkened. "Yes, sir, I was made aware. We were briefed during shift change. Claire's been removed from the position." "I appreciate the response," Marcus said, "but I need to know, right now, whether every part of this flight has been cleared properly. Baggage, security, crew, fuel, maintenance. I don't want another assumption or shortcut affecting this flight, because I'm grounding this aircraft the second I smell anything off." Raul nodded quickly. "Understood. I'll personally double confirm every checklist." "Good, and make sure your team understands. This isn't just about protocol, it's about accountability." Marcus returned to the cockpit and joined Brian. The pre-flight checks were complete, and the cabin crew was on board. 30 minutes later, the boarding process began. Passengers filtered in, most unaware of anything unusual. A few recognized Marcus from previous flights. He was known for his calm demeanor and steady voice during turbulence. But just as the boarding door was about to close, a soft chime buzzed through the cockpit. A message from the gate agent. "Captain, a passenger has reported that the catering crew left the aft galley unlocked. Supplies unsecured. Please advise." Marcus's jaw tensed. He picked up the phone and called Raul. "You assured me everything was cleared." Raul stammered on the other end. I confirmed with the vendor. It was marked secured. It's not, Marcus said flatly, which means we've either got a vendor shortcut or someone didn't do their job. Either way, this flight isn't moving until I verify it myself. He stood up and walked the length of the aircraft to the rear galley. Sure enough, carts were left halfway pulled out, unlocked, and some water containers were still sealed in plastic, not loaded properly. It was a minor oversight, but in aviation, minor was unacceptable. He turned to the lead flight attendant. Inform the passengers we'll be delayed further. Keep them comfortable. Then he called John Michaels. John, he said, we're grounding 706 until further notice. Unauthorized loading procedure in the aft galley. I want the entire catering crew replaced, and I want a full sweep. I'm not compromising this flight. John didn't argue. He knew Marcus didn't speak lightly. 10 minutes later, the catering crew was dismissed and a new team dispatched. Raoul returned to the aircraft, this time clearly shaken. Captain, I take full responsibility. I'm not here for apologies, Marcus interrupted. I'm here to fly this aircraft safely, on time, and without prejudice. This is my crew, my aircraft. If you don't take that seriously, then you don't belong near this gate. Raoul nodded solemnly. Back in the cockpit, Brian glanced over. Everything good now? Marcus sat down, placed his headset over his ears, and nodded once. Now it is. He looked straight ahead. Let's fly. Captain Marcus Hill sat quietly in the left seat of the cockpit, his eyes locked on the flight display as the auxiliary power unit hummed gently behind him. The sky outside was still tinted with gold, but a few clouds were beginning to crowd the edge of the horizon. Inside the aircraft, things were finally falling into place, but the edge hadn't fully lifted. First Officer Brian Carter glanced over and gave a nod. Pre-taxi checklist complete. Ground confirms pushback approved when ready. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He stared ahead for another beat, as if considering not just the flight, but everything that had unfolded in the last hour. Then he reached for the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Thank you for your patience during our short delay. We had a few important safety protocols to review and confirm, and I want you to know that as your flight crew, we never compromise on safety or integrity. We'll be pushing back shortly and anticipate a smooth, steady flight across the Atlantic. Sit back, relax, and we'll be in the air soon. He clicked off the mic and turned to Brian. Let's roll. The aircraft pushed back from the gate, engines starting in sequence, each turbine spinning into a smooth crescendo of power. Taxi clearance came through, and soon the wide-body jet was lining up on runway 24 left. As they climbed into the morning sky, the city faded behind them, Los Angeles shrinking into a patchwork of sunlit buildings and ribbon-like roads. Marcus engaged the autopilot and leaned back, finally letting the quiet settle in. The cockpit was peaceful, but his mind wasn't. He glanced at the flight log resting beside his controls. Normally, once they were airborne, Marcus allowed himself to shift into rhythm. This time, though, something gnawed at him. It wasn't just the insult from Claire. It was how quickly it happened, how routine it was, how easily it could have spiraled into a more dangerous or humiliating scene had he been a new pilot, someone without his status or reputation. What about the next black pilot, or the next woman of color in uniform? Would she be humiliated in the same hallway, by the same procedures? You're quiet, Brian said, breaking the silence. Everything all right? Marcus gave a soft breath of a laugh. You ever get tired of earning the same respect every day? Brian looked at him, eyebrows raised. I can't say I do, but I imagine it's different when people don't expect you to belong in your own cockpit. Marcus didn't respond immediately. It happens more than you think, he said finally. Every terminal, every year, even now. Brian nodded slowly. That's messed up, especially to someone like you. To someone like anyone, Marcus corrected. Rank doesn't shield you from assumption. It just gives you a louder voice to fight it. There was a pause between them. You handled it well, Brian added. Not many would have stayed that calm. Marcus gave a tight smile. I wasn't calm. I was practiced. The cockpit went quiet again. Hours passed. The Atlantic stretched endlessly beneath them, blue and endless. The plane soared steadily at 36,000 feet. Passengers slept. Flight attendants moved quietly. The flight was uneventful, as it should be. But in the cabin, word had spread. A few passengers had overheard the delay had something to do with a pilot being disrespected. A crew member had mentioned that Captain Hill had refused to fly until the issue was corrected. Someone else had murmured that a supervisor was removed before takeoff. Whisper by whisper, row by row, the passengers began to understand the kind of man flying their plane. Some were surprised. Others, especially a few black passengers near the rear, simply smiled. Hours later, the plane descended over England's misty coastline. Heathrow loomed in the distance, traffic patterns tight as usual. Marcus guided the plane with practiced ease, hands light on the yoke, voice calm and commanding as he communicated with ATC. Touchdown was smooth. A barely there kiss against the runway, followed by a reverse thrust and soft deceleration. The passengers applauded softly, as many always did, but this time it felt a bit more meaningful, more knowing. As they taxied to the gate, Marcus gave the final announcements, thanked the passengers again for their patience, and welcomed them to London. Once the plane came to a full stop, Marcus stood and removed his cap. "Nice flight," Brian said. Marcus gave a small nod. "We kept it steady." As passengers began to deplane, several stopped by the open cockpit door to thank him. One elderly black woman placed a gentle hand on his arm and said quietly, "You did good, son." "Not just the flying." Marcus smiled sincerely. "Thank you, ma'am." A young boy wearing a plastic pilot's wings pinned to his shirt looked up wide-eyed. "Are you the real captain?" "I sure am," Marcus said, kneeling a little. "You thinking about flying one day?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Then don't let anyone tell you where you can or can't go," Marcus said, handing him a plastic souvenir pin from his own jacket. "You belong anywhere you want to be." After the last of the passengers exited Flight 706, the cabin slowly emptied of sound. The flight attendants collected their belongings, exchanged soft goodbyes, and rolled their bags off the aircraft. The hum of the engines had long gone quiet, replaced by the hollow stillness that always came after a long, transatlantic flight. Captain Marcus Hill remained seated in the cockpit for a few extra minutes, not because of fatigue, but because of reflection. 25 years of flying, thousands of hours in the air, hundreds of cities, dozens of trainees, and still, one glance from a woman with a clipboard had the power to question everything he had built. He removed his headset, slid the seat back, and stood. His back cracked gently. Age was creeping up on him, but so was wisdom. He grabbed his cap and logbook, stepped out of the cockpit, and walked down the empty jet bridge with the slow, steady pace of a man carrying more than luggage. At the terminal, airline staff were waiting to greet him. Not the usual meet-and-wave crowd, but senior management. John Michaels stood at the center, flanked by a woman in a navy skirt suit, Erica Tan, VP of Crew Services, and another familiar face, Raul Moreno, who looked far more composed than he had at LAX. "Captain Hill," Erica said, approaching him with an extended hand. "Welcome to Heathrow. Thank you for ensuring the safety and professionalism of this flight." "Appreciate it," Marcus said, shaking her hand firmly. "We landed smooth and on time." John stepped forward. "We've debriefed the situation from earlier. I've personally reviewed the surveillance footage, internal logs, and spoken with 2 witnesses. Claire Sutton's employment has been formally terminated, effective immediately." Marcus nodded once. "I'm not here for revenge. I just want this to be the last time something like that happens." Erica exchanged a glance with John. "We agree." And to that point, she pulled out a slim black folder from her handbag and handed it to Marcus. He opened it. Inside was a formal letterhead. Announcement. Appointment to Equity and Leadership Review Board. Marcus read silently. The board was a newly established division, his name printed at the top, charged with evaluating internal conduct across hiring, promotions, training, and frontline behavior. "You're asking me to be part of this?" he asked. "No," John said. "We're asking you to lead it." Marcus blinked. "You've been a model of composure and discipline in situations that should never have happened to begin with," Erica said. "But more than that, your reputation among junior crew, especially pilots of color, is unmatched. They listen to you. They follow your lead. We need that leadership, not just in the air, but on the ground. Marcus looked down at the letter again. It wasn't a promotion. It was a calling. He nodded slowly. I'll do it, on one condition. Name it, John said, that every employee in uniform, no matter their background, gets the same presumption of belonging that they give to someone who looks like you. Silence. Then Erica said, agreed. Later that evening, Marcus stood outside the hotel arranged by the airline. A stately old building nestled in the heart of London, with ivy along the bricks and bellhops in sharp uniforms. He changed into casual slacks and a button-down shirt, his captain's uniform folded neatly in his bag. He walked a few blocks alone, sipping a coffee and taking in the sights. He paused on a small bridge overlooking the Thames. Lights shimmered on the water. Cars passed behind him. The hum of London life pulsed beneath his feet. And still, his mind wandered, not backward to Claire or the lounge or the galley oversight, but forward, to the pilots who'd come after him. He thought of Andre, a black trainee he'd mentored last year, who once admitted he nearly quit flight school after being mistaken for a luggage handler, twice in 1 week. He thought of Maya, a young black woman entering the cadet program, who told him she was already rehearsing apologies she hadn't made yet, just to stay ahead of judgments she hadn't earned. And he thought of his own daughter, Naomi, who just turned 16 and whispered last week, "Dad, I think I want to fly too." Marcus smiled faintly. That's why he'd grounded the flight. Not out of anger, not for pride, but for something bigger, for those who still had the sky in their eyes but hadn't yet faced the storm. He pulled out his phone and texted Naomi. "Landing was smooth. Weather's good. You'd love the city. We'll fly here together someday." Then with a final breath, he put the phone away and began walking again. Because tomorrow the sky would still be waiting, and so would the world that needed to change beneath it.